Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are looking at one of the most fascinating, high-stakes conflicts in human history. We're drawing from some incredible source materials to track an invisible war that has been raging for over 4,000 years. I'm talking about the epic, evolutionary arms race between code bakers who are desperately trying to hide information and code breakers who are relentlessly trying to expose it. This is the story of cryptography. Okay. Let's dive into this. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder how your credit card info stays a secret when you're shopping on a massive site like Amazon? I mean, you are sending incredibly sensitive financial data across an inherently insecure medium, the internet, and it's bouncing through countless random servers, yet nobody steals it. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? Well, it all comes down to some truly brilliant, complex math operating entirely behind the scenes to protect your everyday life. To really wrap our heads around how this works, we need to introduce our recurring cast of characters. In the cryptography world, we always talk about Alice, Bob, and Eve. So Alice is our sender. She wants to send a super secret message to Bob, our receiver. But standing right in the middle is Eve, the eavesdropper, who's constantly trying to intercept and read that message. Really, every single cryptographic system ever invented is essentially just a new way to help Alice and Bob talk while keeping Eve completely in the dark.
So let's start at the very beginning with Section 1, the art of secrecy. For most of its history, cryptography was basically an art form, and it functioned exactly like an evolutionary arms race. Codemakers would invent a clever new way to hide a message, and it would work great for a while, right until the code breakers, the cryptanalysts, developed a new technique to crack it. That relentless pressure forced cryptography to constantly evolve. Let's look at how this builds up over time. The earliest known use dates all the way back to 1900 BCE with these unusual stone carvings in Egypt. Fast forward to 50 BC, and Julius Caesar is protecting his military comms. Then the stakes escalate massively by the 1940s with the incredibly sophisticated warfare machines of World War II. And finally, we hit 1977, a landmark year where cryptography completely shifts into the realm of modern computer science with the RSA and Diffie-Hellman algorithms. The stakes just kept getting higher and higher. Moving right along to Section 2, paper, ink, and scissors. For the first few millennia of that timeline we just looked at, we were firmly in the classical era of cryptography. In this stage, algorithms couldn't be overly complicated because, well, they had to be simple enough to execute using nothing but paper, ink, and a human brain. The main goal here was confidentiality. Alice takes her easily readable message, what we call the plaintext, and applies an algorithm along with a secret key. That process converts her message into ciphertext, and ciphertext just looks like complete, unintelligible nonsense to anyone who doesn't have the key. If Eve intercepts it, she shouldn't be able to read a word of it.
A perfect classic example of this is the Caesar cipher, named after Julius Caesar, who actually used it to talk securely with his generals. This is what's known as a substitution cipher. Caesar would take his message and simply shift every single letter 3 positions down the Latin alphabet. So an A becomes a D, a B becomes an E, and so on. Honestly, it's incredibly clever for its time, but it's an early symmetric cipher, which means both Caesar and his generals had to know the exact same secret rule, that shift of 3. While it worked brilliantly 2,000 years ago, a modern Eve with just a basic understanding of letter frequencies could break this thing in literally seconds.
Which brings us to Section 3, cryptography in the machine age. Because code breakers got way too good at cracking those paper and ink ciphers, the code makers had to invent something much better. As global conflicts escalated, especially during World War II, the sheer volume of critical military communications required something far more robust than a human doing math on paper. So we entered the era of cryptographic engines. Simple paper ciphers were entirely replaced by incredibly complex electromechanical rotor machines. You've probably heard of the ones the German High Command utilized, like the famous Enigma machine or the Lorenz cipher. These things randomized text using mechanical rotors that physically changed position with every single keystroke. It made the code-breaking arms race exponentially harder for eavesdroppers. It effectively shifted the whole field from a manual art form into a rigorous science that actually required early computers just to crack it. And that sets the perfect stage for Section 4, the public key revolution.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that even those advanced machines had a massive, glaring flaw. Alice and Bob still had to somehow secretly share the machine's settings, the key, before they could ever talk securely. If Eve intersected that key while it was being transported, the whole shebang was compromised. But that problem was brilliantly solved in 1977. This was a massive turning point where cryptography went from securely transporting physical secret codebooks to relying on the pure, elegant theory of numbers. Before 1977, the world only knew symmetric systems where one shared secret key was used to both lock and unlock the message. But this revolution brought us asymmetric systems. Suddenly, Bob doesn't have to risk secretly sending Alice a key at all. Instead, he just publishes a public key for the whole world to see. Alice uses Bob's public key to lock her message. But, and here is the absolute genius part, that public key cannot unlock the message. Only Bob's separate, hidden private key can undo that lock.
I love this quote from the Cloudflare blog because it perfectly illustrates the core philosophy of modern digital security. It finally solved the age-old problem of how two people who have literally never met can establish a secure line of communication across a crowded, hostile room. But you're probably wondering, how is it mathematically possible to have a key that locks but cannot unlock?
Well, it's completely possible through something called a trapdoor function. This is a mathematical algorithm that is very easy to process in one direction, but incredibly difficult. We're talking practically impossible to undo. Think of a literal trapdoor in the floor. It is super easy for Alice to drop her encrypted message right down the trapdoor. But for Eve, who is trying to figure out the original message without the private key, it's mathematically akin to trying to climb back up out of a perfectly smoothed, greased trapdoor. You just can't do it.
Let's make this a bit more concrete. Let's look at the actual math behind the famous RSA algorithm. It relies entirely on prime numbers. Step 1. You take two massive prime numbers and multiply them together. A computer can do this instantly. It's incredibly easy. This massive product becomes part of your public key. But step 2 is where that trapdoor slams shut. If Eve intercepts that massive product, she has to factor it back into its two original component primes to break the code. And factoring a massive number is astronomically hard. Actually, to put that into perspective, it would take a classical computer thousands of years to figure it out. That specific easy versus hard mathematical reality is exactly what currently protects your credit card on Amazon.
All right, let's look at where we are today in Section 5, Next Generation Cryptography.
The arms race never stops, does it? The modern digital revolution means we are generating massive amounts of data every single second. We need immense, unbreakable security for web commerce, banking, and communications, but we absolutely cannot afford to slow down the processors on our lightweight mobile devices. To handle this balancing act, we've developed a highly specialized modern cryptography arsenal. We use AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard, which is lightning fast because modern processors have hardware acceleration built specifically just to handle it. For your mobile phone, which likely uses an ARM processor, we often use a stream cipher called ChaCha20 Poly1305 because it's incredibly efficient and doesn't drain your battery. And then there's the absolute crown jewel of modern public key systems, ECC. Elliptic Curve Cryptography, or ECC, is the next generation. You see, as computers have gotten faster, those RSA prime numbers we just talked about have had to become impossibly huge to stay secure, and that really slows down performance. ECC relies on completely different, much more complex mathematics involving algebraic curves. So the crucial point is this. ECC allows us to use much smaller keys, which means way faster performance for your devices, while actually providing significantly more security against increasingly powerful code breakers. It is the absolute perfect modern answer to our evolutionary arms race. But as we've learned today, no lead in this 4,000-year-old race lasts forever. Which leaves us with this massive, looming question. Will quantum computing be the code that finally breaks the lock? Quantum computers operate on entirely different physics and could theoretically unravel the math behind RSA and ECC in minutes rather than millennia. The cryptanalysts are basically building the ultimate code-breaking weapon. So right now, as we speak, cryptographers are actively designing post-quantum algorithms just to survive the coming storm. The arms race continues. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible cryptography explainer with me today.